All right, Aggs, got to keep this train rolling. We just took down the number 13 team in the nation in Auburn this last weekend. Huge weekend for the Aggies. Some big commitments that took place too. Want to keep that up. As we said in the last video, winning has a lot to do with that. So another top 15 win would be huge. We got Walter Nolan going to Tennessee this next weekend. So making a good statement here because if Tennessee impresses, you just never know. That is his home state. I don't really think we have a lot to worry about, but it still means a lot. So we're going to preview Ole Miss tonight, get us an idea of what's going on. This is a dangerous team. I had this pegged as the loss for us this year, preseason. I had us winning against Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Alabama. Thankfully, I got that one right. But losing this was the only loss I had on the schedule. So I do still think this is a dangerous team. There's a lot going on with this team currently. So we got a lot of context to provide for this tonight. But ultimately, we're going to dive into the numbers real deep and get you a well-rounded view about what's going on. So let me go over my philosophy real quick for those of you that are tuning in for the first time or for the second time or whatever it may be, just to kind of really solidify this. So I'm trying to work backwards. And the object is to get into the end zone, score as many TDs as possible, right? Well, to do that, you need to be a very efficient, you need to be a good team in the red zone, offensively and defensively. So that is the first area I'm going to look at. Red zone efficiency. Also, I like to put an emphasis on how you're trending. So not just how you're doing overall, but contextualize that with what you've done either in the last 3 or 4 games and or what you do in conference and versus ranked teams, things that may apply to a similar type matchup as you're going to be having, right? After red zone, there's a lot of emphasis put on all the in-between stuff. How do you get to the red zone? And what I've come up with is to do that, to get from your 20, your 10, wherever it may be, to your opponent's 20, you have to sustain drives. And I think the biggest indicator of sustained drives are first downs. So we are going to look at first downs in large part as well and see how many it takes for a team to get first downs, how many first downs do their opponents take to get touchdowns. So check back that up real quick. I think I misspoke. We're going to look at how many touchdowns it takes the team to get how many first downs it takes that team to get a touchdown, as well as their opponents, and compare those. Okay, so some teams may take 4.5 first downs to get a touchdown. Some may take 9, and you'll kind of see some differences in those going on right now. The last area I'm going to look at is negative plays, and this comes out in tackles for loss, sacks, penalties. I'm not really going to put in turnovers into that. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Turnovers is just not something that I look as a predictive piece. So you'll see what the turnover margin is for Ole Miss and for A&M, but because those things happen so sporadically, they're not something that's very easily predicted. And so I don't want to use that as a projection. Of course, if turnovers happen, it's going to make a large difference in the game. If we win the turnover battle, I believe we are going to win the game most likely. If they do, same thing goes for them. It can really shift the dynamic of a game. So if you like all that, you're interested in all that, you're skeptical, watch the next part. But if you're buying into all that, give me a like, give me a subscribe. Love to have you on board. Doing this late night, of course, after the 9 to 5, so I'm here for the same reasons you are. I love Aggie football. Ole Miss, you Rebels watching, tell me what you think, if you like what's going on too, or if you think it's accurate. I'm not expecting you to subscribe. It's not like you want to listen to an Aggie podcast all the time, but I would like to hear the feedback and see how you project what I'm going to put out there versus how you know your team. I'm not an expert in your team in the day-to-day, of course, so I like to get more of that context because what I'm trying to do is provide a lot of in-depth knowledge, stat-wise, with context. So let's go ahead and jump in. All right, as promised, first thing up, red zone offense. Ole Miss is ranked 102nd in the nation. They are converting 77% of the time. A&M's ranked 47th. They're converting 87% of the time. Now, take a look at some of the differences that are taking place here between the overall versus the conference versus when facing ranked opponents. Ole Miss starts to fall off as soon as they get into conference, going down to 75 from 77. And then versus ranked opponents is even a sharper drop off to 58% conversion rate. A&M, however, is drastically increasing, right? And it's to the maximum. So when in conference, A&M's converting 100% of the time, ranked 100% of the times, and you see the ratios for touchdowns to field goals. So one way or another, A&M is getting points basically on every drive so far whenever they're facing ranked teams. All right, quite a large discrepancy here on defense, right? So this is red zone D. Ole Miss ranked 75th in the nation. Their opponents are converting 84% of the time. A&M's opponents are converting 70% of the time. Good enough for an 11th ranking. When in conference, Ole Miss's opponents are converting 92% of the time, 91 versus ranked. A&M, slight uptick, but you still see quite a big difference. Looking at over 15 percentage points difference, and A&M in conference, their opponents are converting 77% of the time and 75 when versus a ranked team. All right, now with both of those in mind, I want to start off with this one about red zone rushing. So you kind of see what both teams are doing rush-wise when in the red zone. A&M doing 2.5 yards per carry, Ole Miss doing 3.9. Clearly that gives them the upper hand. If you're able to run in the red zone, you're able to convert more often. So there must be a little something extra going on, though, with Ole Miss's drop-off now. So a couple extra things to add in, right? I told you that with turnovers, I'm not going to focus on it, but I do want you to be aware of it. Currently, Ole Miss has a turnover margin of 1.2 and A&M's even. So A&M is giving away as many as they're getting. However, I went to check this out for the last 3 games, and digging that little bit extra gave me a little bit more detailed information that was pretty substantial. And with that being said, Ole Miss is getting as at a 2.0 turnover margin, so they're getting 2 more turnovers than their opponent on average each game. However, A&M doesn't stay at even; they jump up to 1.6. So A&M trending in a little bit different way in that turnover margin to make this not look so starkly different and in favor of Ole Miss. So kind of a key thing there to think about, and there's maybe some context that's going to explain this. We'll touch on that as we go along and get into some of these other stats. All right, so you'll remember this same stat line when we looked at this for Auburn, and we had a very similar result taking place. So overall, teams are pretty evenly matched. Ole Miss is getting 5.2 yards per carry. A&M's 5.4. So yeah, A&M's got the edge. What you're going to see is 2 things here. One, you see on the left-hand side here, Ole Miss is having a drop-off. Last 5 games, which includes October and the November game, Ole Miss is only getting 4.7 yards per carry, where A&M is pretty much standing pat at 5.3. When facing ranked opponents, again, you're going to expect a drop-off, right? But it is a big drop down to 3.2 for Ole Miss, and the Aggies hold at 5.0. So kind of talking about that last stat line and now this one, and there is something to keep in mind here with the matchups that have been had for each team so far. So A&M plays Prairie View A&M next week, which is going to be our 4th out-of-conference game. Ole Miss played Liberty this last week. I think to the tune of 27-14 is what that came out to, right? But they've had their 4th quote-unquote cupcake, of the year already. So that was a game that they were really supposed to, tear up, and that definitely affected their overall stats, but it didn't affect their ranked, obviously, because Liberty's not ranked. But that probably has something to do with why there's a sharp drop-off so much. They got some inflated stats overall, but not playing as evenly as you see on the right hand side there with A&M and how they're doing. So right now we see in a similar situation as Auburn. So I want to keep that in mind also, because that'll help us understand what the prediction needs to be if our sort of projection comes off wrong, because we already have a result in Auburn that we can compare to what's coming up in those same numbers that we saw last time. All right, turnovers are a big way to change the dynamic of a game. A team that's been outgained by 200 yards can win a game in that way with turnovers. Another way to really affect the outcome is in the passing game, because you get large chunks of yardage this way. Of course, you can in the run game too. It just doesn't happen as often. Typically, runs you're doing well. You're averaging 5 yards per carry. Passing, something above 7 is pretty typically good, and as you see, this Ole Miss overall line at 9 is quite good. It's very good. A&M's is slightly below, say good. Uh, you would probably categorize the 9 yards per attempt as elite at that point. That's very good. But then you see a drop off by Ole Miss, and again an increase by A&M. So Ole Miss dropping down to 8 yards per attempt, and in October at 7.4 for A&M, and then again with the ranked. And so we see this trend happening again when we start to filter this for a more current understanding, like in October, or versus ranked teams, which is what Ole Miss and A&M are going to see playing each other this week. We start seeing a much different characterization of what's actually taking place. I would probably still give Ole Miss the edge in the pass game because of that overall a number. Matt Corral is very good. He's going to be the X factor for me in this game. He is a little bit banged up, so this is going to be a big deal to see whether or not he's going to be able to pass at the overall number, or if he's going to be at the ranked number, the October number, right? They just played Liberty. I know he's a little bit hobbled right now, and he can do a lot with his legs, and doing a lot with his legs helps to open up the passing game. So I'm not real sure I'm ready to go with giving A&M the nod on this one, even though they're doing so much better, against the ranked, and getting better as the year has gone on, versus what Ole Miss looks like to be doing not as good as the year goes on. So I'm gonna leave this one kind of up in Ole Miss's hands because of Matt Corral. I'm a big believer in him. I think he's a very good quarterback. He's tough. Um, kind of in that sense can remind you of Calzada. He gritted out against Liberty and did what he could, right? But he is experiencing quite a bit of pain with that injury. So I'm going to give this one to Ole Miss for the moment, with the caveat that this definitely could be flipped A&M's favor pretty quickly and heavily. All right, so also now that we've talked about Matt Corral, I think this is a good time to start talking about Lane Kiffin. Here's something else that kind of worries me about this game. So we've talked about the middle game a little bit here, right? We haven't gotten into the first downs yet, but I wanted to go through the rushing game and the pass game for both teams before we got to that. So Lane Kiffin is, I don't know how you want to explain him, a loose cannon. This is a guy that will go for it on fourth down, and I don't think has a whole lot of regret when he does it. We could very easily get punched in the mouth early on if he decides to go for it, say on his own 30 or 40-yard line on a fourth down and two. They've got a dynamic offense. Matt Corral can pick up some first downs with his legs, so getting a couple of those can really shift that momentum, and it could be something that they do it early, could hold it through the first half. Then are maybe trying to play catch up after that if things go well. But likewise, punching them in the mouth on that could then shift the dynamic completely in the other direction, and we find ourselves just really throwing egg all over their face for that. But it's something to note because not only is he someone who probably just despises punting and wants to go for it all the time anyways, he is crafty in his play design. So I expect he is going to have some of these. Um, they are 7-2, and so they do need a win, and I expect them to pull a lot of tricks out of the hat and just be kind of no holds barred there with this game, especially since they're going to be at home uh, and home field advantage. So keep that in mind as we go through the rest of this. Now we're going to get into the negative plays because this is big and shifting the dynamic of a game as well. If you're going to make a first down, after a first down, and you're going to have a 2nd and 10, and then work that into a 3rd and 8 or a 3rd and 12, 3rd and 15 by penalties, tackles for loss, sacks, then you make drives much more difficult and specifically more difficult to sustain. Those first downs are not easily as gotten, and it's a labored thing to do to get those first downs, and so that's why I'm looking at this so heavily. And then we'll transition into the first downs because they kind of go hand in hand. Starting off, this is probably going to be one of the most even stat lines that we have for both teams that we're going to see throughout. Either one team wins or not really ready to give it to one team or the other. But in tackles for loss, I think this is really pretty even. You see what they did versus the ranked team. Both teams are getting 5 tackles per loss per game. Overall, Ole Miss is leading that. And you can see in October they've actually done pretty good. They, stat-wise, they are giving up a lot on the ground, but this is not really in relation to that, right? So we kind of hear the overall narrative that their defense is not that good, and most people are expecting A&M to rush for 200 yards in this game, plus, but that's not to discount that they can't get some tackles for loss and that they're going to get some sacks. I definitely think that they are going to get some tackles for loss. We'll see. We gave up quite a few of those against Alabama and Auburn as well, so I'm not really quite that worried about when those happen. Our defense is something that we can lean on, and we performed well whenever we've gotten behind the chains by minimizing the damage. So, but this is just one area of the negative plays. So let's take a look at a couple more. All right, now again, to support that last point that was kind of being made, we've heard the narrative about what their defense is supposed to be. Not a great defense, but they do have some highlights, and in the area of negative plays, they tend to do pretty decently. Overall, they're getting 3.7 sacks per game. We're getting 3. Honestly, from my perspective, it feels like we're getting a lot more than that. So why this stat line is off like that, I mean, I haven't watched Ole Miss that much, but it feels like we're getting more than 3 sacks per game. Of course, it's been an uptick as we played the ranked teams, and so maybe that's why I am feeling that, because it is correct that we are getting more than that. And 4 is a pretty significant number, and maybe the ranked teams is what I'm sort of remembering quite a bit more. When we played, like Missouri, Colorado, Kent State, New Mexico, we especially early on, we're probably somewhat either playing down to our competition just a little bit, and or we had some things we were still figuring out on both sides of the ball. I mean, we knew the offensive line early on too, and seen a big shift there. But also on the defensive side, we were missing McKinley Jackson early on, and Clemens was out for a game, and we've had a little bit of stuff to shore up on the backside. So maybe that has something to do with it. But versus ranked, it seems like we should perform better. Since we are playing this ranked opponent with the 1.5 sacks per game more, and those can be 5-yard negative plays that stop a drive and just going to make it much more difficult to get. So this is a big stat line right here, and glad A&M's going to take it. All right, big one that's unassuming is penalties. What kind of penalties is the team committing? So be careful how you read these numbers, right? Ole Miss is committing 9.8 penalties per game. A&M's only committing 6.8. You got a difference of 3 right off the bat. In the yardage category, Ole Miss is basically hurting themselves to the tune of 85 yards per game. So their penalties are costing them 85 yards. A&M's are only costing them 58. So first down, holding, and false starts, pass interference. All these little things are adding up. Clearly, they're getting some big ticket penalties that are causing that 85 to be their average. They are averaging 9.3 penalties per game, and that's in the last 3 games. A&M's only averaging 6.3, so the difference of 3 is holding, and so you can see we can probably count on them committing 9 penalties per game. And so if the average holds and they're, those penalties are costing them about 8 yards per penalty, then, we can count on about 72 yards of penalty yardage from them. So, we're doing right at about, like I said, 58 yards that we're giving up per game. So we're right in the 8 yards as well. But obviously, with only 6.3 being our average, we're only going to be giving up somewhere in the area of the 50s. So just a little difference there. It's definitely something that's going to contribute to the overall negative plays category. The last thing I like to look at with this is, what are your opponents doing to help you out? You're making penalties, you're false starting, you're holding, you're getting pass interference. What is your opponent doing to help, even that out? Are they doing stuff? Are they giving you first downs as well? And that will help you sustain drives, and that will kind of negate some of those negative plays that you have when you're tackled behind the line of scrimmage or sacked. You may get sacked, but then your opponent commits, pass interference the next play. Makes a pretty big difference, right? It completely washes out that sack and makes it meaningless at that point. So be careful how you read these numbers. Ole Miss's opponents are committing 5.8 points per game. A&M's opponents are committing 6.3 penalties per game. I think I said points earlier for Ole Miss. That's penalties per game, okay? And Ole Miss's opponents are giving Ole Miss 48 yards. Okay, they're giving them 48 yards. Texas A&M's opponents are giving them 50 yards. Likewise, you see this big difference in the last 3. Ole Miss's opponents are only committing penalties at a rate of 4.6 penalties per game. A&M's is 8 penalties per game the last 3 games. And so that's an average. That's a lot of help that A&M's opponents are giving them. So that's good and bad, right? If that helps not there this game, it could really affect A&M, because maybe that large number that we're getting has been extremely beneficial, whereas Ole Miss is not. They're kind of trading with less margin. So they're doing what they're doing without as much help from their opponent, if that makes sense. So. But it could be something that the opponents are doing because of who they're playing. So that's something to think about as well. All right, folks, for me, this is the meat and potatoes. All right, we're down to the first downs. So this gives an overall picture also of like how the offenses are performing, how many points they're getting, how many first downs they're getting, how that translates to touchdowns, and then what their overall ratio is. So Ole Miss is doing 4.9 first downs per touchdown. So they have to get 4.9 first downs to get 1 touchdown. A&M is taking 5.2 first downs to get 1 touchdown. Now, the overall points total is affected obviously then by how many first downs are you getting in a game. Ole Miss is getting 26.7 to A&M's 21.2. Very big difference there. So when Ole Miss is getting more first downs and it takes them less first downs to get a touchdown, that's when you're going to see those points balloon up. And because of that, it's no surprise that when it comes to points per first down, Ole Miss is taking the lead, not by much, but it's still something, and it's going to project for them a little bit higher total. So they're getting 1.41 points for each first down that they get. That's if you broke it down by first down. If first downs got you points, that's about how many they'd get for each one. And A&M's getting 1.35. So got a slight advantage starting off here for Ole Miss. Those were overall. Now we're going to look at the last three games and what each team has done. So in the last three games, Ole Miss, it's been taking them 6.4 first downs to get one touchdown. A&M's taking 7. So slight advantage there, Ole Miss. They're both getting 24 first downs per game. That's an uptick for A&M, a downtick for Ole Miss, if you remember. And the way that these points are playing out, Ole Miss is getting 1.08 points for each first down. A&M held with 1.37. So you see a big shift here when we look at the last three games. Now, why is that? Thought through this. There's a few answers. Be curious what you guys think may be the answers for this. But partially, if I think back to some of the games that A&M's played, we're having long fields, and so it's taking more first downs to get those touchdowns and to score those points. But likewise, because the points per first down is still so high for A&M, that means that we are having a high drive success rate. So we may be starting back on our own 20 and driving 80 yards, and we're still finding a way to get points. And so this means that A&M is good at, again, sustaining drives, getting first downs, and then converting drives into points. Whereas Ole Miss, they're getting quite a few first downs, and they're getting some touchdowns, but when it comes to the overall picture, they're just not quite translating to points as well as A&M's are. Maybe some of the bigger stat lines I've seen when it comes to this. And so we just looked at like how many first downs it's taking each one of these teams before they get a touchdown. Now we're going to look at the opponents that each team are facing and what it's taking them to do that. So Ole Miss's opponents, they're needing 6.8 first downs to get a touchdown. A&M's opponents are needing 8.8. Now, just right off the bat, thinking through that number, right? If you started on the 10-yard line every drive, then that would, or if you started on the 12, that would kind of translate to your 8.8, right? So you need that extra 8 yards to get that last little bit, and then you needed 8 first downs. That's kind of one way to look at it. It doesn't mean that exactly, so don't take me literally on that one, but it's an approximation for how to think about it. That means that A&M's opponents, because we know that they're not really starting on the 12-yard line every drive, and so what that means is they may get 4 or 5, maybe even 6 first downs. It's just not been enough to get points or translate into 7 points, and so that means A&M's getting quite a few more stops, and so this actually kind of speaks into third down conversion rate. Where we saw that was kind of even earlier, but here this gives a little bit, in my opinion, a better tell of what's going on with third down. Ole Miss is just, their opponents are just not having as much trouble getting 7 points. A&M's opponents are struggling, and this is going to play out. Look at the first downs per game. A&M's opponents are only getting 18.4 first downs per game. That's overall. This is for the season right now. Ole Miss's are getting 26.3. Now, that also could be because of who they've played. But A&M's played more quality opponents at this point. Maybe Ole Miss's overall quality hasn't been as high, but they just played Liberty, so I would expect that to have lowered down, right? Because they would feasibly have held Liberty to less first down since they're not as quality of opponent as other teams that they played. But we look at the points that each team is getting per first down, and Ole Miss's opponents are getting 1.02, but A&M's opponents are just really struggling, and they're only getting 0.79 points. So it's taking them a lot of work to get points on the board, just a lot of work, and so that really just wears a team down overall. And this is going to get even stark as we look at what's going on more recently. And same idea as before, but this is our last three games now. So Ole Miss's opponents, it's taken them 9.1 first downs to get a touchdown. This makes a little bit more sense because they just played Liberty, right? However, A&M's are taking 11.3 first downs. Now, of course, you can't even get 11 first downs in a drive, so it goes back to that same thing I was talking about before. A&M's opponents, they're playing with long fields. This speaks to also the field position that we're doing and how our special teams are working, and that we're also able to drive and get ourselves into better field position so that we can punt and have a chance to pin them inside the 20. And then from there, our opponents are, they're getting 4, 5, 6, not, first downs, but then they're having to punt. Or they're not getting any first downs and having to punt. And this has happened a bunch this year, the 3 and outs. And look at the drop off in first downs per game. Again, I would have thought Ole Miss's would have been a little bit lower, especially since having just faced Liberty. But A&M holding at a very low number of 16.6. That's a low one. And look at the next number, whereas Ole Miss in the last 3 games, again, having faced Liberty, holding them to 14 points, their opponents are only getting 0.77 points for each first down. And then A&M's, this has got to be an elite number. 0.62 points for each first down. That is just outright stark. I am going to run this number as soon as I get done with this to see what Georgia is doing recently, so that I can have something to compare to, because we know that defense is really elite as well. And 0.77, good number from Ole Miss, but it's just not against the same caliber of opponent that A&M's faced so far, especially just coming off of Auburn. So right now, this tells me when it comes to first downs, A&M has a sharp advantage, both on what they're doing, say on more of the offensive side of this idea, as well as what they're doing on the defensive side of the idea. And next, we're going to use all this information. Let's go ahead and project out what the score should be. I say should be, but I don't really quite mean it like that. I actually take these numbers a little bit more to look at them for the margin, to give me an idea about who holds the upper hand for winning. I don't really think that this projects what the score is going to be. That's just my opinion about these numbers. I just don't think they're reliable quite in that way. So, but if we're going to run the simulation for those particular numbers, this is kind of what it would play out to be if those trends held. Okay, so those trends may not hold, but they might, and if they did, this is what it would turn out to. So when we're just looking at the overall first downs, that's where Ole Miss comes ahead 37-28, based off of how many points they were getting for each first down to A&M's. But as you saw when we started boiling this down to last 3 opponents, and then what our opponents were doing for their first downs, as well as what our opponents were doing in the last 3 games, you get a big shift that's going on there, and it just gets kind of worse and worse as we contextualize this. So in the last 3 games, when it comes to first down, Ole Miss was only projected for 25, A&M projected of 32, so a difference of 7. When we're thinking about how the opponents are performing per first down and the points that they're getting, we then even see a bigger drop off. So projected for Ole Miss 14, A&M 26, 12-point differential, and that seems to basically hold when we're looking at the last 3 opponents. Maybe again a little bit of a slight uptick for Ole Miss in this category since they were just facing Liberty and we hadn't faced ours yet, but 10-20. And thinking about where A&M has been holding their opponents, Ole Miss is a dynamic team, and I think they're going to get up for this game. So I'm not sure holding them to 10 or 14 is exactly realistic, but it is very possible. Our defense is very capable of doing this. If we get after that quarterback, and I love the uh, blitzes that Elko has been dialing up. I think that these differentials are very likely if we're continuing to play like that. Overall, here's how it worked out for me. When I'm looking at red zone O, red zone D, rush, first downs, and then opponent first downs and the scores that those were projecting, as well as the tackles for loss, the penalties, the negative plays. I've got all of those in favor of A&M. I gave the edge to Ole Miss in the pass, and then um, red zone rushing was Ole Miss. They were a little bit more efficient there, even though when we saw some contextualized stuff, they weren't clear favorites in either one of those categories. Whereas I don't feel like that there was very much argument for any of the categories that A&M took. So this has given me just a really big overall feeling that A&M is the superior team. So they're taking six out of the eight categories. Ole Miss only getting two, and those are just very slight margin. Now I'm going back wondering to myself though, because the line on this game is only 2.5 in favor of A&M. I was watching Late Kick, and Josh Pate was saying that their model came up with in favor of Ole Miss as the favorite by 2.5 points. So go figure. Um, if I look on ESPN right now on their matchup predictor, I think it has Ole Miss at a 55% chance. So it's really got me scratching my head. Um, and so I've seen a lot of things out there that are just kind of saying, well, maybe this is closer than you kind of think or you kind of feel. We are playing at Ole Miss, and so I was racking my brain trying to think. Okay, well, we played at Missouri. Um, I believe we had Mississippi State at home this year. We had Alabama at home, Auburn at home. Um, who else do we have at home? South Carolina, um, New Mexico, Kent State. We went away to Colorado. So we really haven't had that many away games. We still have to go to Death Valley, so that's another. But perhaps the us going to Oxford has something to do with this. So that's the only thing I can figure out. But I'll tell you right now, I've got A&M in this. I'm gonna even take the points. I just don't have a much confidence that it's gonna be close. I think we're going to play like we've been playing. I think we're going to get after the quarterback. I think our corners are playing some of the best ball that they've played all year. Our defensive line is playing excellent. Um, our linebackers are playing their best ball as well. So our defense is really, really clicking right now. All right. So with our defense clicking the way they are, I just don't see how I can worry too much about whether or not A&M is going to win this game. Yeah, is it possible? I mean, it absolutely is. And so now I've got myself thinking and wondering, how is it that I could be wrong on a prediction that A&M is going to win or a prediction that A&M is going to cover? Of course, the first thing that comes to mind is turnovers. Ole Miss has been good at turnovers. They are playing at home. We're going to have to face a crowd. That's something that's got to lead into that, right? So that's definitely one way that we could go wrong. Another one that could be the bigger issue is whether or not Calzada is going to. I think he's going to play in this game. I haven't heard anything about why he wouldn't play, but we know he had his shoulder this last game. How is that going to fare? Is he going to be able to play the entire game? So maybe there is some just uncertainty that's coming from the public and those betting, where Vegas wants to set that line about um, how likely he is to play the entire game or how likely he is to go out. That would shape the game up pretty big if he were to go down. So that to me is the main issue. I don't have a lot of worry about Corral getting out. We do struggle with the mobile quarterbacks. We've done fairly well with them this year, save the Colorado game. But we did a good job with Nixon last week. That's probably one of the best jobs that we've done. I still remember that tackle that he got out of. I think it was last year when we were down on. They had us on in our territory on the 10-yard line. We had him sacked, and he leaked out still. Took it in for a touchdown. So Matt Corral can work on his feet. He is a little bit hobbled, but he can still move. I imagine. But maybe it's enough where he really just is not going to be effective running. So that's another thing that could have a shift in a dynamic. One thing we haven't talked about yet either, though, is whether or not they're going to have their receivers. They were without, I guess, quite a few of them this last week. If they've got them back, that's going to be a different team. We talked about this with going over the Auburn film. So if they're back, you've also got a different team. If they're not, I mean, they only mustered up 27 points against Liberty. So I find that problematic coming into a matchup with us. So um, it looks pretty good. It looks pretty good on paper. I think it's going to have to be something haywire if I'm going to be wrong on this. We've been playing pretty consistent. I th- I think we got the Rebels number on this one, so I'm going to take A&M. I'm going to take them pretty big. Let me go ahead and give my prediction on the score here. I think it's going to be pretty convincing, and I'm going to go uh, 31 to 10. I think they're going to get just a few points. I think it's going to take them a little bit of a while. I think they'll probably somewhere in the third quarter get to that 10 points. It'll probably say a 24-10 game at that point, and then we'll put in another touchdown or so, make it 31-10, stifle them the rest of the way. I think that's what's going to happen. I got the Aggies to cover, and I got us going 8-2. So that's what I got for you this week. Let's go beat the hell out of Ole Miss, and let's go into that Prairie View week 8-2.